Hi there, this is Dr. Saraswati, Department of Resource Management of Nashlingam University. A consumer is someone who can make the decision whether or not to purchase an item at the store and someone who can be influenced by the marketing and advertisements. The consumer is the one who pays to consume the goods and services produced. Consumer is an individual who buys the products and services for his own personal use and not for the manufacturing purposes or for resale. A consumer is one who can make the decision whether or not to purchase an item at the store and someone who can be influenced by marketing and advertisements. Anytime someone goes to a store to purchase a toy or a shirt, beverage or anything else, they are making that decision as a consumer. Consumer is the most neglected being in the present scarcity-ridden society. A business unit cannot dare to ignore its consumer if it wants to flourish. Despite initiating several acts and rules, consumers encounter a number of problems. It is the education concerned with the teaching of the people, the skills, the attitude and the knowledge required for living in a consumer society in order to achieve maximum satisfaction and utilization of the resources. It is also a fundamental component of general education which helps to support the consumers in their attempts to organize their everyday lives in a sustainable way. First, we look into the concept of consumerism. Consumerism has been defined as a social movement seeking to increase the powers and the rights of buyers in relation to sellers. It is a movement which strives to augment the rights and the powers of consumers in relation to products, services and traders. The complaints made by the Persian Emperor Cyrus the Great about the malpractices in Greek market had created the ripples for such movement and has helped to change the maxim. Caviter emptor to cavit venditor, meaning let the buyer beware to let the seller beware. The movement became stronger with time since consumers started realizing the fact that despite their powers to expose, veto to any product, their powers to exercise their right was rather remote. To exercise their right, the need to unite and to form a movement was found imperative. Hence, this movement is described as the organized efforts of consumers seeking redress, restitution and remedy for dissatisfaction they have accumulated, the question of their standard of living. The impact of consumerism thus on the nation's economy and general well-being is thus evident. This is essentially a movement against unsafe product and false claims made by the producers. The movement got its shape in the West. In USA, the movement was initiated by Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson. In 1962, John F. Kennedy approved the rights of the consumer through the Declaration of Consumer Bill of Rights. The movement got shape in the West and according to the bill, the consumer has the following rights. Right to safety, which is the right to be protected against the marketing of goods which are hazardous to health or life. Right to be informed, to be protected against fraudulent, deceitful or to grossly misleading information, advertising, labeling and other practices and to be given the fact that one needs to make an informed choice. A right to choose, to be assured wherever possible of access to a variety of products and the services at competitive prices. Right to be heard, to be assured that the consumer interest will receive full and sympathetic consideration in the formulation of the governmental policy. Thus, the trust of the consumer movement in India has been on shortages. The year 1966, where the later reorganized as Consumer Guidance Society of India was formed, which marked the path for an active action. They dealt with three areas. That's a consumer education, protection and representation. Some other voluntary organizations working in the field are Indian Federation of Consumer Organization, Consumer Education and Research Center, the National Consumers Protection Council, etc. The government also passed many laws for the protection of the consumer and to save them from exploitation. In the last series, the Consumer Protection Act of 1986, CPA 1986. Unfortunately, the consumers in India are robbed of their economical liberties in matters of consumption, choice and satisfaction. Next, we would look into the consumer movement in India. Like the sellers and traders, consumers also have to perform certain duties and responsible consumers to evolve a fairly appreciable consumer market in any country, and this will amount to successful consumerism. What are the duties of consumers need to take up and how are their responsibility defined as? Now, the consumer duty. Looking into the consumer duty, the first one would be insist on the receipt of bill without fail on all purchases made. Read the information or instruction given on the packets carefully before any purchase. Don't give away for temptation and on seeing misleading advertisement. Pledge to buy only standardized products, that is, those with ISI mark, AGMARK brands, etc. File consumer complaints against default in goods, deficiency in services, or unfair trade practices. What are the consumer responsibility? The first one would be the responsibility of self-help, maintaining proof of transaction, demanding proper claims, and proper use of product and services. Now, what is the status of Indian consumer and what are his major problems? Consumer is the most neglected being in the present scarcity-ridden society. A business unit cannot dare to ignore its consumer if it wants to actually flourish. But even after a lot of acts and rules, now a number of problems are being faced by the consumer. The major problems faced by the consumers in general are lack of information. This is actually a primary problem. The customers are so ignorant that they don't even know the sources of getting information. Second, illiteracy. This is still the fate of many consumers across the country. Ultimately, their illiteracy is a major reason for them for not understanding the policies of an organization or the government. They remain unaware to comprehend the uses or misuse of a product. No fair return. Pricing policies are such that many times the consumer does not get the fair return for the price he pays for a product. They pay a high price for the goods they purchase but receive less satisfaction. Exploitation. The consumer in the Indian market are exploited by the seller or the trader by the ways of various malpractices like creation of artificial scarcity, hoarding, black marketing, high prices, adulteration, etc. Adulteration. As we all know, traders and sellers practice adulteration of goods. Eventually, despite paying high prices, the consumer does not receive pure and quality goods. Now, when profit maximization becomes an ultimate goal of the businessman, the consumer is the sufferer. Irregular supply. Irregularity in the supply of goods causing artificial storage of goods at times when the consumer requires the product is another problem. The traders successfully create a scarcity by hoarding such goods and selling them when they can charge a higher price and yield a good profit. Here again, the organization only benefits. Attractive packing. Being lured by the attractive packing, which may even contain inferior good, is taken as a weakness in the consumer. Consumer need to be prudent enough to demand quality products and not attractive packing strategies. Disorganized consumers. This is a self-inflicted problem rampant in recent years. The consumers, being widely scattered, do not show sentiments of unity. Contrarily, the producers and the traders are organized and united. When the consumers are not united, the traders take opportunity to exploit them. All these have led the consumer to understand the need for consumerism. Why consumerism? They empower consumers to have access to the basic needs of life. Protect the consumer from hazards to their life and safety. Enhance the access of consumers to adequate information to enable them to make informed and environmentally benign choices according to the individual as well as the societal needs. Promote consumer education through formal as well as non-formal education system so as to help the consumer in decision making. Promote accountability and transparency through the adoption of citizen charters. Provide expeditious and inexpensive system of delivery of justice. Promote an independent consumer movement in the country by providing assistance to consumer and other relevant groups to form their organization and giving them the opportunity to present their views in decision-making process. Initiate and implement appropriate mechanism for exchange of information on measures of consumer protection nationally, regionally and internationally. Now, what is the meaning and concept of consumer movement? It is evolved basically as a protest movement. It is a type of mass movement where mass means a general body of consumer with a common purpose and an idea. Contextually, it is a non-official movement. Now, people who initiate it can be a public, a voluntary consumer or an organization. Sponsors are not the government, but the movement is recognized and supported by the government. It is an offshoot of consumer protection. How does this evolve in India? A brief history. Our country is an ancient history of consumer protection. It was a part of ancient culture and has formed the core of Indian administration. Introduction of abundant commercialization of activity has eclipsed the rich old heritage. As in Europe, the movement was in the form of consumer cooperative. Kautilya's Arthashastra was the basic law of ancient India. Later, it was strengthened with the provisions to protect consumers. Organizing the sale of commodities in such ways that they did not inflict trouble to the general public was a major measure to taken up. For instance, those trade activities gaining high profit, thereby causing trouble to the general public, were stopped immediately. Now, what is the consumer movement in the modern period? This movement in its present form emerged only in 1960s in India. What could be the objectives? The objectives are to provide opportunity to the consumer to make intelligent purchases, help in the recognition of consumer requests, strengthen the protection against fraud, misrepresentation, unsanitary and unjust products, voice of participation of consumer representation in management of aspects affecting the consumers, assist in promoting consumer interest, help in increasing consumer awareness, enhance consumer expectation through consumer education, motivate pioneers and leadership formation in the movement, facilitate organized effort through consumer societies. Hindrance to the growth of the movement could be lack of leadership and management, illiteracy, multilingual, multicultural nature of the citizen, dearth of adequate sources, especially the financial, to organize movement at the national level, attitude of the people, which is the non-cooperative nature of the people. Now, the consumer groups in India. We have various consumer groups in India, of which few are listed here as CF would be the Consumer Forum. Indian CEC is the Consumer Education Center India. IAC, Indian Association of Consumer. BCT is the Bombay Civil Trust. CGSI would be the Consumer Guidance Society of India. CVC is the Citizens Voice Club, which is located in Coimbatore. Now, we'll move on to the next part of this particular heading, that's a consumer market. Now, before getting into the consumer market, first we should understand market and its meaning and definition. Market has its origin from a Latin term, mercatus, which means to trade. It is well described as a place or geographical area where buyers and sellers meet and function, goods or services are offered for sale, and transfers of title of ownership occur. It is through markets the separation between the production and the consumption functions are bridged. The term encompasses three distinct meanings: a place, group of people, and an activity. Now, moving on to the consumer market is the sum total of all the goods and services purchased in a given period of time by all the inhabitants of a given country or the section thereof for the satisfaction of their consumption needs. The four components of the consumer market are people, their needs, varied and specific, and the ability to buy are determining factors. The next one would be the purchasing power, and it depends on the potential customers who represent the potential market. Then the need for specific product. Here, even purchasing power is not a factor. Need only counts, not only affordability. Willingness of a consumer to fulfill personal need with specific product, like we have brand, trademark, etc., which counts here for the along with the willingness. A consumer cannot be forced to buy. Thus, from the point of view of a manufacturer, the consumer market is only that segment of the people who can afford to buy his product, who have the need for it, and who are willing to buy the product in preference to all similar products sold by the other manufacturer. This also entitles another condition that the consumer should have to the authority to buy. Not all are entitled to buy anything. Now, what can be the classification of the manufactured goods? On the basis of consumption, industrial goods and consumer goods are the two divisions of the manufactured good. Some products have both industrial and consumer market. Examples of that would be computer. They serve both the markets. Industrial goods. These are the goods that are destined to be sold primarily for use in producing other goods or rendering services, as contrasted with those goods destined to be sold primarily to the ultimate consumer and are called as industrial goods. So, they are not sold directly to the consumers. The characteristics of industrial goods that can differentiate from the consumer goods would be that they are not meant for consumption. Their buyers are evidently different from the buyers of consumer goods. Further processing is required in case of industrial goods before they can be finally consumed. A typical buyer is well informed about the product, source, alternate source, merits and demerits, supply and demand, and completion, etc. Here we go with the classification of the industrial goods, which is actually two in nature, and one is being represented in the form of a table based on the industrial products, and here namely raw material, major equipment, accessory equipment, component parts, process material, consumable supplies, and industrial services. The second classification, which includes that production facilities and equipments, production materials and production supplies, and management materials. Now we move on to the next category, that's a consumer good. Those goods destined for the use by the ultimate consumers or household and in such form that they can be used without commercial processing are called as a consumer good. They are also called as a product. Goods are basically classified into three categories as industrial goods, consumer good, and the agricultural goods, of which we saw the examples into the earlier. Now, basis on this particular classification, there is a broad classification which is again being presented onto the table. Basis of classification as market trend, consumer buying, characteristics of goods theory, and based on the durability and the tangibility, they are again finally classified. Now, there is also a classification of market which is again projected onto the table based on the category, and it goes as geography or area, economic basis, time, business, importance or agricultural marketing, goods and regulation and nature of transaction. Therefore, a market comprises of a group of potential customers for a particular product who are willing and able to spend money or exchange other sources to satisfy their wants. Evidently, a market consists of people with wants, purchasing power and willingness to utilize the purchasing power. Now, there are 5 different types of markets, that is a industrial, consumer, reseller, government and international. These markets can either be vertical or horizontal in nature. The vertical markets are the ones which is often found in industrial marketing, where direct sale actually involved in this. A market is described as a vertical if the product of the manufacturer is used virtually only one or two industry. Here the products can be a tailor-made to meet the specific needs of the buyer. Example for this would be manufacturers of aeroplanes. Horizontal markets, if the product is used by industries or the consumers, then it is described as a horizontal market. The consumer product undergo a large scale of production. Therefore, in a horizontal market, the product must be developed to meet the various purposes. Because of the numerous customers involved in a horizontal market, the producer has to give up equal importance to the personal as well as the impersonal methods of sales promotion. The use of middlemen is also greater in a horizontal market. Example for this would be the manufacturers of watches. Next, we look into the marketing. It is explained as a business function entrusted with creation and satisfaction of the customer to achieve the aims of business. The process of marketing begins with the conception of a business idea or earlier than that. Marketing is one that is directly concerned with demand, its recognition, anticipation, creation, stimulation and finally the satisfaction. The three terms encompassing the markets are linked together by slender thread called transfer. To be exact, it is exchange. All are party to the exchange. They give, receive and values. Now, definitions of marketing would be that it is the process of determining the consumer demand for a product or service, motivating its sales and distributing it to ultimate consumer at profit. It is a process of planning and executing the consumption, pricing and promotion of ideas, goods and services to create exchanges that satisfy individual and organizational objectives. Now, we also have a product-oriented definition which has been given by the Marketing Association, that is AMA, who has redefined marketing as a process of planning and executing the consumption, pricing, promotion and distribution of ideas, goods and services to create exchange that satisfy individual and organizational goals. Based on the customer-oriented definition, it goes as the process of discovering and translating consumer needs and wants into the product, and it is the service specification creating demand for these products, the services, and then in return expanding these demands. The next one would be the nature of marketing. The following are the features and characteristics of marketing which are indicative of their nature. The first one is a goal-oriented process, deals with the product and distribution, promotion and pricing, focuses on goods and services ideas, intends to satisfy and delight the customer, focuses on delivering a value to the customer, it is surrounded by its needs, is a business and business is marketing, is a process of exchange, and it is an universal functioning. A non-profit organization can also perform the marketing functions as hospitals, colleges, charitable institutions, etc. So, marketing is actually an universal function. Here again we have a table which shows the difference between market and marketing. We move on to the next one, is a merchandising, which is a term which refers to product planning, and it aims at internal planning relating to products or services for marketing at the right time, at the right price and in proper quantities, color and sizes. It covers everything from packing of the product to the way in which it is being offered for sale. As stated by Mahatma Gandhi ji, the father of the nation, a consumer is the most important visitor on our premises. He is not dependent on us and we are on him. He is not an interruption to our work. He is the purpose of it. We are not doing a favor to a consumer by giving him an opportunity. He is doing a favor by giving us an opportunity to serve him. Consumerism is a social and legal force which aims at protecting the general interest of the consumers. Now, consumerism is a movement or policies aimed at regulating the product or services, methods or standards of manufacturers, sellers and advertisers in the interest of buyers. Such regulations may be institutional, statutory or embodied in a voluntary code occupied by a particular industry, or it may result more indirectly from the influence of consumer organizations.